Hello and welcome to this episode of Sansad TV, in which we're looking at an important subject, but it often doesn't translate into conversations in military circles or even outside military circles. And what we are talking about is strategic communication. Now, often people are not too familiar with the term, so they get stymied of sorts as to what this is about. But we've got two military officers of high rank who will help us decode this terminology, strategic communication. And we have Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, who has had many prestigious appointments, many responsible appointments in the armed forces in his tenure in the army and before he retired as Adjutant General. And we have Air Vice Marshal P.K. Srivastava, who has been a fighter pilot and is a person familiar with what it takes for the Air Force to convey its messaging. So I start with you, General Sharma, sir. You have written an insightful, brief, but a very precise piece on strategic communication, in which you said it is a perception strategy that provides information, ideas, and actions to align perception of key and important areas of one's policies to one's objectives. Could you explain this?
Okay, thank you, Maroof, for inviting me. The fact is that of quite some time there was a feel that though we do immense amount of work in the armed forces, we are not able to convey what at strategic levels, we are not able to convey what is what all is being done. And we are not able to explain issues as to what's happening in. So we are inviting criticism from the mass public, from people who are well read. So there is a gap between what we are doing and what people are perceiving or what people's expectations are. And we may not be aligned, what we are doing may not be aligned with what the nation thinks or what the political hierarchy thinks. So there was a gap being felt, and I thought it was necessary to actually pen down something about strategic communication. How do you communicate? How do you change perceptions, expectation over a period of time on a gamut of issues? And I don't think strategic communication is any form of propaganda or it's a negative information or it's a manipulative issue. No, it's not a manipulative issue. It is just that you have to convey the issues across to the nation and to the public at large as to what's happening and why a thing is happening.
No, you've explained it briefly, as your article also does. More importantly, I think you led me on to my question to the Air Marshal, simply because Air Marshal Srivastava, why I require you to clarify on this issue is precisely the point that General Sharma is building upon, that we are not able to convey what our intent was or what we set out to do. And therefore, there is a gap between perception and your deed. Now, I'll give you an example which continues to hang around whenever we talk of strategic communication, and that is the fabulous strikes carried out by the Air Force at Balakot. I remember mentioning after this to people at the highest level that you may be satisfied that your targets have been neutralized. And belatedly, some pictures began to come in the public domain, which then led the critics of the Air Force and the government to say, this is a concocted exercise. More so, the reluctance to come forward straightforward with the information that you've hit terror targets at Balakot. You've not damaged civilian life because of no collateral damage. You went there, you caught them sleeping, you achieved all that in 15 to 21 minutes, but that was not communicated. So to me, it dented the image of efficacy of the Air Force by not communicating, and people thought it was a PR exercise because our adversaries are quick to jump and say, oh, this is all publicity, this is afterthought, though there is reason for us to believe it did happen, including the confirmation by Masood Azhar's brother that they've been hit. So why the disconnect? Why the reluctance to come forward with it? Why, even when I got permission to make a documentary on how it happened, there was a reluctance at the highest level at air headquarters then, and I personally met the top people. The permission never came despite prodding from their superiors. Why?
So, Maroof, thanks a lot for inviting me on this show and this subject. And let me congratulate General Rakesh Sharma for bringing out this in the public domain and talking about it. There is a strategic gap in the strategic communication. We have not really understood in military terms the precepts which are being followed by all developed countries, like US focuses on it in a very, very big way. Because strategic communication communicates your intent, your ideology, your way of functioning. And in today's world, when media, the social media, and all kinds of media has become so dominant and is one of the most potent tool for carrying on your diplomacy, your military diplomacy, your thought processes, it's being so ignored that one would say, yes, we need to do something about it. You rightly pointed out one example, and there are examples which you know in military terms. Like, if you really allow me to quote, I would quote Stalingrad brought out in the fore the vulnerability of German forces, which were till then expected to be most impregnable. And then Allied forces got to know, yeah, they can be defeated. It happened, there was another strategic messaging given to India during 1971 conflict, when 7th Fleet was sent to the Bay of Bengal. And today also, all the time we use this, but we have not really defined it. Because unless you define it in proper structured manner, what I feel, what we lack in armed forces, if you allow me to say, I'm a veteran now for last 11 years. So I don't know what progress has taken place really in the headquarters and in their minds. But as I understand, we have not defined it. We need to define it. We need to put a structure in place. We need to put some people of your caliber, your type, into messaging game. Understand this is one very potent tool of war fighting. It is not something which can be ignored. Like, we cannot ignore anymore the information warfare, which is moving towards intelligentized warfare. So you ought to first understand the concept, put the assets in place, human assets, structural assets, and other assets, because it will have all kinds of barrier of communication. So you rightly said, we are not making use of strategic communication as you brought out in the way it should be done. Air headquarters today is bogged down, in my opinion, as it was in my times, by the structures we have. Only this man or this guy can speak on behalf of the Indian Air Force, as if he's the epitome or essence of everything what Indian Air Force is. It is not so. So, and second thing, I think which mars our communication is in public mind the word secret, classified. Transparency in a democratic country of military actions is very important, because you have certain operational secrets, but they need to be discerned, sifted through what is required for your own public to understand what actions were there on your behalf. So I'm very, very thankful to you for making it at least a debatable point. Let people think about it, that yes, it is a matter which impacts our warfighting capabilities.
Yeah, well, very well brought out, sir, and thank you very much for being so honest and straightforward. It's important. I believe that honesty is not left to somebody just to show financial scrupulousness and honesty in responding with a correct answer to your senior officers, but honesty across the board. Because if you're not enough, the absence of information is in itself used by your adversary to show your inadequacies. And I go to you, General Sir. One point the Air Marshal rightly brought out, you also touched upon it. We all know that, in an era of professionalism, you are expecting a very highly capable officer who's suddenly done very well in his command appointment in the valley fighting militants and is probably the regimental type of the army chief, is brought in as head of strategic communication now, which used to be called ADGPI. And it's an area where he is familiar with. After all, he must be a capable officer to become a general officer. But there are a lot of other nuances to it, which by the time they get to grips with it, they turn to get posted out to a more prestigious appointment. Now, the problem is that all along, and I've noticed it for at least 3 decades, that this kind of skill is left to somebody, acha, wo bhi kar lena. And the other problem is that the whole emphasis on operational efficacy, that you are a good commander in operational circumstances, so you're good for all. Whereas on the contrary, a guy who may have been seen by his superiors as too communicative in too many gatherings and not keeping a stiff upper lip is just the guy for a role in strategic communication. Your views?
Yeah, so as you firstly said, there has to be professional honesty, integrity in even professional thinking. So when we are discussing it, of course, it'll come to media, we have to be open about it. Now, the fact of the matter is that just because I'm a convent-educated fellow, I will be able to communicate issues is not true. It is not my being from a good English-speaking background. It's not English. It's not Hindi. It's not the language. It's the thought process behind it. It's what you want to say. In many other countries, even the operational plans are put through the information people to say how they will be conveyed. Now, I'll give you an example for that matter. Look at the doctrines prepared by the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Joint Doctrine. Now, if you read into it, rightly, these doctrines should have been put through information managers, some people, especially like you, who will read the doctrines and say, look, what you are saying and what you are conveying to your own people and you're conveying to adversary is absolutely wrong. Because I will find faults into this. I'll give you an example. Look at the Joint Doctrine, and of course, written by good friends here. It says, Joint Doctrine reinforces and complements the 3 doctrines of the Army, Navy, and Air Force. No, Joint Doctrine must lay down how Army, Navy, Air Force would fight the wars tomorrow. It is not supposed to reinforce their doctrines. In fact, Joint Doctrine actually lays down the orders for the Army, Navy, Air Force. We've done it ulta. We have gone across and trying to integrate the doctrines together. There were words used. Our Joint Doctrine is aligned with Army, Navy, Air Force doctrine. The neighbor will see, underline it and say, look, they have got no coordination. They're just trying to align. They're not integrating. This is strategic communication. You have miscommunicated to your adversaries that you are aligning 3 doctrines and you are not integrated and fighting a combined war. That's loss of strategic communication. I'll give you a second example. Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Unfortunately, we have been involved into the insurgency and counter-terrorism for a very long time. And now what happens is, obviously a mistake would occur. This mistake occurred, in Nagaland recently. And then it starts off a clamor for Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Removal it. And the convenient word everybody uses it is draconian. And the draconian is spoken so many times in media immediately after the incident that you ask, we retired people, we now hobnob with others and people say, it must be draconian now. Everybody is saying it's draconian now. Why are you not removing it? The perception of the people across the board is that there is something draconian and the armed forces, the army can do anything they wish to do so and they will not be challenged. That's because we wake up only when something goes wrong. That's the problem of strategic communication. You have to build a case to a larger audience over a larger period of time through larger number of media which are available. It wasn't, when we were youngsters, we had only one print media. There was Krishi Darshan only and Doordarshan. But now there is so much of media. And we were discussing earlier, I in the army headquarters have to be in sync with the command and the corps, because it's not that they should be singing in different voices. Everybody has to sing the same thing. And also people outside, people who are interested parties, who all have to say, look, this is the story. And the story may take 5 years or 10 years to be convinced to the public.
Okay. No, sir, you've again led me on to my next question. It's basically public perception. And I think, I'm sure the Air Marshal can also, in his forthright manner, put it in the right words. You see, one of the things I found a shortcoming in the approach of the military to strategic communication is that the sense of self-righteousness. We are working in national interest. So anybody who questions us is questioning national interest. But on the contrary, and the other point that you talk about aligning and sync and, having, now, you may have a national purpose, but the military is more often than not is so gung-ho about the purpose that it has set out to achieve that it is not able to counter simple questioning by people that is the Armed Forces Special Powers Act draconian? If you say it is not, and I would like to quote one example at least of General Hasnain, who's commanded a corps in the valley, and he's very emphatic and very clear in explaining where this confusion between what is the political aim and the military's aim has come into being in J&K. Yeah. Likewise, Air Marshal Sir, I'd like you to explain to us that, the military is often not able to convey something about what it is doing outside of operational issues. Why? Because there is a lot of work the military takes on, which is non-operational, but is of national importance. Most recently, the COVID relief measures, the Air Force took on. Why isn't it drum home, whereas other agencies bring up much lesser initiatives and make a song and dance of it?
So you rightly pointed out, Maroof, the gaps which we have. But what is the remedy for these gaps? So two things come to my mind readily, which I have been pondering over for a long time. One is professional structure within armed forces to address this issue of communication, strategic communication. It is not, as you rightly pointed out, just because somebody is a great general or is a great air marshal, he'll become a great communicator, because the other job does not require to be communicating in that sense which you mean. The sense is different. And second thing, we earlier in our times when we were young, there were a certain number of people who were in the press, and they only had to be, if you allow me to use the word, it's a bad word, managed. I could give some transcripts and they could print it, and there was that limited number of people. Now, with all kinds of social handles being available, like Twitter, like Facebook, like WhatsApp, anything which you do anywhere becomes world known in no time, all over the world. Nobody knows how it has gone off the way. So unless you are professional, all your words are chewed, understood, and passed through, as General rightly said, through a person who understands the value of each word. And when they put together what they communicate otherwise to an adversary, because adversary is not going to look at it from your perspective. He is looking at it by poking what is not there. And one more thing which comes to my mind, the transparency and the self-righteousness. We can't be self-righteous in today's world. That what I say is right and is right, because I can do no harm to my national interest. No, you're all the time under audit of the public scrutiny. And you have to understand it. Be general, be a marshal, be anyone. All of us, all political leaders are under huge scrutiny. Everybody is under huge scrutiny. And that can only be bridged through strategic communication. So first thing is understanding the definition of strategic communication, which simply says that all your audio, video, print, any kind of messaging which happens, it should be in sync. Who puts them in sync? There's no professional structure. You need somebody to put it in sync, some structure, not one individual. So where is that? And that brings me to my very original point, which I used to earlier say, and which I took a leaf from, Royal Air Force. You need career officers, all right. They do their
Absolutely.
job, they do the
Absolutely.
war fighting, but you need professional officers who don't rise in cadre, who don't get posted very often, but they are the backbone of your knowledge. That's where you
Very
absorb
true,
the
sir.
knowledge.
Very true. In fact, you've touched on an issue that I was anyway coming to. That if you look at and you read about the history of, say, World War II, you had officers of the rank of major and lieutenant colonel and equivalent who made game-changing decisions.
Absolutely.
For instance, how the Enigma machine was run by a naval commander, that whole team. And, Enigma changed the information that was gathered
Yeah.
from what German designs were. I can give you any number of other examples. Major operations were entrusted to officers who are today seen as only good enough to attend meetings and not take decisions. But that time, you may not have risen in rank, and rank is not everything. I've always believed,
Yeah.
disrespect to you and the
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
But you need to have people with a nose for this kind of activity. And General, I'm coming to you with probably what might be my last question to you, and that is, social media has become rampant. We've just knocked off 35 Pakistan-centric YouTube channels.
Yeah.
We are only creating firewalls around us. But why can't we go on the aggressive with our own set of YouTube channels? I mean, Bollywood's the biggest industry in volume in the world. And we call ourselves an IT superpower. But I think we only do the backroom work. I mean, we don't do the kind of pioneering work that IT powerhouses do. So, where is the need? As I used to say to the late CDS, I told him, I said, there is a need to make a geek brigade. People who don't confine to drill square, who are not confined to PT, who don't have to cut their hair and shave their beards, but they will do what needs to be done to alter the game, alter the enemy's plans. Now, that is where we are again falling short. Why?
So, like you rightly said, it's all a question of perception game, a perception of ourselves also. Now, look, you remember 1999 Kargil happened. There was a system of briefings being carried out every day. Even Ukraine today has got a military communication center where they come and some people come and convey every day is what's happening. We do not have, if you as a media personality have to go and find out what's happening, you have to go to somebody's office, sit there and request him. There is no orchestrated, well-planned system of a daily 12 o'clock afternoon briefings is what's happening.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and like you rightly said, it doesn't have to be a general. In fact, it should not be a general. It should be a young girl, say she's captain or a major, or like they were doing it in Afghanistan, the Americans. They had a media communication center. Media people used to sit around there, lounge around, have a cup of tea, and there used to be some young people will come and give a briefing and answer questions. And one of these days, a senior gentleman will come. So there was a two-way traffic on, and two-way traffic is at all levels. So, firstly, we require the right people who have been taken in. We can take media savvy people from join as the armed forces and then establish communication centers all over the place and then start conveying things and make a narrative. We have to make a story of an issue. They could be about 10. We did sentiment analysis once and we found about 12 issues were rankling the general public. And we said, okay, 12 issues. Those days, Europe was in a very big form, remember 2015. So, how do you address and make these issues and not lying, not manipulating? It is just saying it. So you decide and make a long-term story on those issues and start disseminating it through all medium possible. And you're right. We may be having a YouTube channel. Maybe, it's not known so much. We may be having, we have Twitter handles. But some of the things we do know, like it irks me to say, every day you say, okay, on this date, so-and-so passed away and was martyred in, say, in JNK. That is a human interest story. It's not a perceptional story. If I say every 10 days, there are 2,000 terrorists sitting into 40 camps across in Atmukam and Chakoti, that's a routine story. It's been spoken so many times. it doesn't evoke emotions. Yeah. So you have to actually get around making long-term stories narratives which will help people to understand what exactly is happening.
Exactly, sir. In fact, what is news? News is something that is new. You can't bandy about the same thing that we know there are 42 camps and we know where they are. Somebody like me will yawn and say, tell me something new.
Truly.
So you will only catch people's imagination. A very eminent journalist, he's still a very prominent figure in the public domain in India. And he once jokingly mentioned to me, news and journalism is about recycling the same information with facts being correct, but you just project it differently.
Yeah.
And you have to be a whiz at that. We have to start having courses on that in our training establishments,
Yeah.
and not a course on driving and motor vehicle maintenance. I mean, that is something which is passé. So anyway, thank you very much for both of you for your wisdom. And I'm sure this is not the final word, but this is the start of a dialogue on a subject which is crucial for India to get on top of the propaganda of its adversaries. Until our next episode, thank you very much, and thanks for watching. Goodbye.